Being an Igbo man, you're already on a great pedestrian. I am not trying to, bring others low, but an Igbo man has a very special place. That is number one. That is why they try as much as possible to make some part of Igbos believe that they are not Igbos. But let me tell you people one thing. Destiny can be delayed, but can never be denied. All is left is for Igbo nation to come together and speak with one voice. Boom! What has not happened will start happening. Even more things will happen.
Across the Atlantic, because colonizers feared what would happen if the world saw their strength. That is why the world has been silent about their legacy, because their existence exposes the lies of colonial narratives. But the truth is rising now. The descendants of the Igbo are rising. The world will know that the empire feared the Igbo, because the Igbo were never meant to be ruled. They were meant to lead. So if you are of Igbo blood, or African descent, or if your spirit yearns for justice, stand tall, walk proud. The legacy they tried to silence is roaring louder than ever. You are not the forgotten, you are the foundation. You are not a shadow of history, you are the light that history tried to hide. And when you walk with that knowledge, with that power in your chest, no empire, past or present, can ever make you feel small again. The British Empire feared the Igbo not for their weapons, but for their wisdom, self-governance.
That it transformed them into legend. Led by their own voices, the captives rose against their oppressors. They overpowered the crew, and as the waters of Dunbar Creek lapped against the Georgia shore, the Igbo captives refused the life that awaited them. Instead, they marched into the water, singing as they walked. The water spirit brought us home, descendants say today. To some, it was a mass suicide. To others, it was a spiritual return, a refusal to let slavery claim their bodies or their souls. The event became known as the Igbo Landing, a story whispered in communities, passed through spirituals, and reshaped into folklore of the flying Africans who rose above their chains and returned to Africa through the sky. But what truly happened that day? Why has history tried to silence their voices? And why does the Igbo Landing remain one of the most powerful acts of resistance in the dark history of slavery?
Well, these things you are hearing is not fabrication. These things are truth, how it all happened. I said I read a book my father gave me. My father tossed that book to me, written by Frederick Forsyth, The Making of a Legend. The legends are the Igbos. In that book, I cannot forget that particular verse that said, there is no other place you can find in Africa the number of doctors and lawyers in Biafra land. No other place in Africa. You see, that's why, they are trying to make us not to be together. Because they know that if Igbos are together the way they do their things and reason, they will move mountains. When the British came, when they visited, the Igbos resisted. Not like the other part of Africa that accepted them like that. The Igbos have already an organized system, both spiritually and civilization-wise. Igbos are organized. So it's not a new thing, and the British were marveled the kind of, knowledge that exists in Igbo land, and there is almost violated all reasoning that colonialism brought to Africa.
Not bought, not inherited, and certainly not forced by any outside throne. This model of society undermined the very foundation of colonialism, which was built on the lie that Africa needed saving, structuring, and civilizing. But here stood the Igbo, already organized, already advanced, already powerful. Their knowledge of the land, of trade, of spirituality, and of communal governance made them a threat to the imperial narrative. Colonizers feared what would happen if other African tribes followed the Igbo example. What if the continent realized it didn't need to be ruled? What if the people realized they already had power, structure, and the divine right to lead themselves?
You see, so the British, they have to destabilize the Igbos, not to make them, spoil their business. Because that time is business. Colonialism is business. The Royal Niger Company is a company. They are in charge of Nigeria. Another person just said that their headquarters is also in Asaba, just like the other guy said the other day. So you see, they are not reasoning that way. The British reasoning is that Nigeria is a business and they don't want anything to spoil their business. So the British don't have option then than to incorporate the Igbos in the management of Nigeria. That's why you see top government officials, then top places were being occupied by the Igbos, because they already understood how the system works and how it should work very well. I used to say these things that Igbos are not really after politics, but after the functionality of the society. How is the economy functioning? Is it functioning well? Are people living their lives the way they are supposed to? Are the economy okay? Are things normal, majorly? What about the business environment? Is it good? So it's not about Igbos that are not majorly about political. They are not after political gains, the power. I want to be this, I want to be that, I want to no. It's not majorly the fundamental makeup of an Igbo man.
Must rise from the ashes of silence. A time when the voice of the past breaks through the walls of history and shouts into the present. That time is now. That voice is the voice of the Igbo people, a people so powerful in spirit, so unbreakable in will, that even the mighty British Empire trembled at the sound of their name. They didn't fear the Igbo because they were violent. No. They feared the power of their mind, the strength of their unity, and the depth of their culture. The British Empire, with all its guns and global power, was shaken by a tribe that refused to bow, refused to break, refused to be erased. You see, the Igbo were never just another group of people to be colonized. They were a force of resistance, a pillar of self-rule, a threat to imperial lies. The Igbo believed in freedom long before the West defined it. They believed in justice before the colonizer could spell it. They governed themselves with systems so sophisticated that even European scholars were...
Biafra has been able to produce rockets, and this has been tested, and foreigners saw it, tested.
What sort of a rocket?
I'm not a military man, so I know it's... Biafrans have now rockets.
You know what
they are producing their own arms, producing machine guns, producing armored cars. And this is a record in Africa. This is the first black African country to produce rockets.
The violence. Three of the 5 states in Southeast are in the top 12 for GDP per capita. Yet there's no seaport. The bridges are not good. The roads are not good. So it is a development and infrastructure issue, but it's seen through a political lens, as a political grievance. The same with security, which is you have significant deployment of security forces, yet the perception is the DPOs are not from Southeast, many of the officers are not from Southeast. They are not necessarily well-versed.
Hear it by yourself. The top 12 GDPs of states in Nigeria, the Southeast has about 3 states in it. Without a seaport, without an international airport, busy international airport, but still among the 12, and had their 3 states in it. From 20 pounds. My brother, from 20 pounds. If had it been that there is a seaport in the Southeast, you know that they said 80% of the containers that enters Nigeria ended up in Onitsha. So why can't a functional seaport be established in Onitsha? Why? Why must the people move from Onitsha to go and clear their goods somewhere else far like Lagos? Is it not a calculated something? By now, we would have had a functional seaport like that of Onitsha River Port, but it's not functional. It is high time that the Southeasterners, majorly talking about the governors, should hold the bull by the horn. I said they should forget about this politics that some of us are playing, but I thank God that they are waking up now. Now you see competition. You saw the budget the other day, and if you look around, you see some good projects going on within the Southeast. So, but it's as if we have not started where we are supposed to be. We need to put more effort. Some of these things can be done by the Southeast governors. If they put their heads together, they can be able to do this thing. The only thing it can take is longer time to achieve that. But for achievement's sake, it can be achieved. Very, very sure.
Has been a land that has been destined by God to be great, and nothing will stop it. In that short clips that you listen to, Asaba was former headquarters of Nigeria when the Royal Niger people were here. The Royal Niger, their headquarters was here in Asaba. Before later to Calabar, and before Lokoja and maybe Lagos. Asaba has been destined to be great. So
Asaba, the capital of Delta State today, was the first capital of Nigeria through the charter given by the then British colonial government to the Royal Niger Company. The genocide that happened during the war happened in Asaba. So my people have always had the short end of the stick.
All right, viewers, we are going to start this section properly now. And, majorly is going to be on the Igbo man per se, on the Igbo man, how the nature of an Igbo man is and what Igbo man has passed through and still be standing tall. Yes. You cannot talk about the economy of Nigeria without mentioning an Igbo man or the Igbo nation. The Igbos understood how economy functions. It is in the DNA. Well, a friend once asked me, one guy from the north when we were serving, say how Igbo men, we making money. Make I tell him the truth. I should tell him the truth. As if there is any other magic Igbo people are doing to get money. So that is it. The Igbo man is always focused and knows what he wants. When it comes to the colonial era, the British was marveled what they saw concerning the Igbo people, and they decided to do something about it before they will spoil their business. What Zeke, the father of independence, what he did then, and the British, they thought that this guy has poured some sand into their garri, that they are going to pay him back, and he strikes people back in their own coins, unquote. So the coins that Igbos were paid back with. So that is it. Zeke honestly fought for independence and other things about Nigeria. But what happened finally? The British fought tooth and nail that they will not hand the proper power to an Igbo man. Rather, they do otherwise, so that that relationship will be there. And up to today, the Buckingham Palace is still, in charge of what is going on. That's why if you are serious of becoming the president of Nigeria, you must visit Buckingham Palace so that you will be tutored. So, but however, it's all good. Something that cannot break you will only make you stronger. The Igbo people are waking up now. They want to come together once again to take their destiny into their own hands, to achieve what God has destined them to achieve. However, what happened in Asaba then, the Asaba massacre, is a painful thing, So, but I'm going to show you a clip about that so that if you don't understand it, that clip will help you to have a better knowledge of what really happened. But according to that clip, that there are some people we are preparing to receive federal troops and cooking offensala and the rest. But there are some things I don't understand. How can you be cooking those offensala? You want to receive federal troops, knowing that the leader of the queue that started this thing is just a neighboring town to your own town. How can you do such? That's what I don't understand. Maybe I need some explanation. And knowing fully well that you speak Igbo language, that the federal troops may even, how these people do. If you try to deny, that's when you even get more punishment. That's the way it goes. But if you stand firm, you may have it less about. When you try to play smart, when you try to deny what you are, that is when you get more punishment. Well, I want to hear explanations from people that knows better what happened, but let's listen to this interview.
And to tell them that the evil plan of the enemy to think they will wipe the people of Asaba from the surface of earth, no, it will never happen. I said the way forward is for that particular day of October 7, the day of the massacre, to be declared public holiday in Nigeria.
Okay.
And for the federal government to have a world press conference and apologize to the people of Asaba. And tender a letter of apology to us. You see, my brother Belushi, there is no ethnic group, there is no nationality, there is no tribe, there is no group of people, race, that will face what Asaba people face, that they will still remain in the surface of the earth today and still be existing and be relevant. If you go to the Bible, what happened to the people of Amalekite that were wiped away? That is exactly the evil plan of the Nigerian army in 1967. Precisely on the 7th of October, 1967, when they came in here and finished all our fathers, our uncles, our senior brothers, and so on and so forth. And the issue is that, Belushi, our people are not fighting the Nigerian army. We are neither supporting either the Biafra or supporting the Nigerian army. We are just on our own. And when the Nigerian army came, what we did, being hospitable people, in the village of Ogbosuwe, the all 5 villages in Asaba all agreed to welcome the Nigerian army and treat them fine. In our normal regalia of our celebration outfit, white, the whole of them were putting on white without water. Our women were cooking. The ones that were cooking rice were cooking rice. The ones that were cooking ofensala were cooking ofensala with ofo numbu, with pounded yam. To welcome this Nigerian army, not knowing that they have evil intention. At that grand, that's supposed to be a celebration grand, the Nigerian army opened fire on all the male children as from 6 years and above. What do you think their intention is? Is to wipe the future, wipe out the future, the entire race
Of Asaba.
of Asaba people. But thank God that we're able to recover. And Asaba is still existing today. And by the grace of God, we will continue to exist. Asaba has been a land that has been destined by God to be great. And nothing will stop it. In that short clips that you listen to, Asaba was former headquarters of Nigeria when the Royal Niger people were here. The Royal Niger, their headquarters was here in Asaba. Before later to Calabar and before Lokoja and maybe Lagos. Asaba has been destined to be great. So we being the capital of Delta State today is not by accident. It's not surprising to some of us. But again, what happened? You know, the first coup that took place in Nigeria in 1966, led by Major Chukwuma Nzogo.
Kaduna Nzogo.
Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzogo, who is from Opanam. When that coup took place in 1966, when Nrozi and other people, you remember?
Yes, I remember the coup.
They now, the Nigerian army, I don't want to call a particular tribe, but let me just use the word Nigerian army. But to be fair, and for we to know what we are doing, the northern part of Nigeria, the northerners, the armies from the northern part of Nigeria, they never forgive Nzogo. That is why the other coup that took place, the Gowon coup that took place that made Gowon to be head of state, they wiped out all, especially the people from the southeast and some from the southwest, in retaliation. That is the history. Thank God that history today, the president has helped us to bring history back into our curriculum. They thought they can kill history all these years before. And during that civil war, not only that they come to stop issue of Biafra, but they have it in their mind to retaliate the coup led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzogo. They thought maybe Kaduna Nzogo is from Asaba, not knowing that it's from our neighboring town here, Okpanam. And they wipe off all our fathers, our brothers, our uncles, and so on. Though people like us then were not born. But you can imagine you losing people that are supposed to be around to take care of you when you were born. We started from afresh. The people that you are seeing today in Asaba are the young people after the war. Majority of the people you are seeing, male children that you are seeing today in Asaba, are the young people after the war. Though there are still few of our leaders, like Obioba Jama, like you talk about, and including this our president Asaba and so on, that were able to survive. Some of them survived, maybe because they could not attend that meeting where they welcomed the Nigerian army. Or maybe they were not in Asaba. Some of them were in Lagos, some abroad. That is what happened to our people, my dear brother. I personally, I lost nothing less than 6 members of my family from the East chase. Yesterday here, Belushi, our president, thank God for his life, granting pardon to coup plotters, people like Momo Vasta that was maybe erroneously, during Babangida time that he planned coup. People like the Ogoni 9 and the Ogoni 4, people like Albert Macaulay, they were all given pardon and given even posthumous award. Partially, some years back, Nigerian government tried stylishly to give some kind apology, but not total. Today, Ogbeshi Honorable Taj Usiche is calling, is calling on the federal government to today look into the people of Asaba and tender apology. Is it because we have it in our character that Asaba Yaleba, any small thing we say Asaba forgive. That is the meaning of Asaba Yaleba. That does not mean you will take us for granted. In every other part of the world that this kind of a thing has happened, we know what the world has done in restitution to the people. I am joining my voice to the voice of our able leaders in Asaba to say the federal government should tender on behalf of the Nigerian army and on behalf of the previous government to tender apology to the people of Asaba for the massacre, for the killing of our uncles, for the killings of our father, for the killings of our brothers, and for killing my uncles personally for no cause. People unarmed, unarmed people, people without gun, people without any weapon, put on celebratory clothes to welcome you, to make it comfortable for you. You turn your guns to them. Taxpayers' guns. Today, thank God, battalion of a Nigerian army is here. What you should be doing every time, I think I should start with the commander here. Either the Jews, I don't know what they call them. And mind you, I'm also a barrack boy. And not only, do you know what Asaba people have done for this Nigerian as a whole? The best women that have ever been married in Nigeria are from Asaba. We can talk about Miriam Babangida. We can talk about Miriam Ali, Amadou Ali, and so on. Even Mama Vasta, that was given pardon yesterday here, came here to get married. In other words, if you want to marry the best woman on the surface of earth, come to Asaba. It is proven. And that is why even that up to today, no first lady has ever beat the record of Miriam Babangida. The beautiful, stylish, academically qualified, psychologically qualified, intellectually. So, my dear brother, it is painful. Today is 10th. Day before yesterday marked 58 years of the massacre of our people. And today I'm dedicating this program to honor our past heroes. And to tell them that the evil plan of the enemy to think they will wipe the people of Asaba from the surface of earth, no, it will never happen. Many more of our fathers have arisen, and I am one of them.
Honorable Taji Kuku.
Now, my dear brother and my listeners, today is dedicated to celebrate and to honor and to also pray that the soul of the departed rest in perfect peace. In perfect peace.
Amen.
And that this kind of a thing will never happen again. This is the purpose of this program today. I said the way forward is for that particular day of October 7, the day of the massacre, to be declared public holiday in Nigeria.
Okay.
And for the federal government to have a world press conference and apologize to the people of Asaba. And tender a letter of apology to us. We don't want money. We're not demanding money from you people, from Nigerians, from federal government. But we want a federal university on the soil of Asaba. If it's on the pipeline, complete it. If it's not on the pipeline, do it immediately. And I know you, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, you can do it. If you've done it for the people of Ogoni land, you can do it for the people of Asaba. The University of Environment in Ogoni land. So you can do the same thing here. And we also want enough federal presence here. Not just army
not
barrack.
That kind of presence. So
not just army barrack.
Okay.
Are you getting me now? And the military barrack that is here in Asaba now should begin to do what we call corporate social corporate social responsibility to the host community by offering different kind of health care. And I want the military to also have their own hospital established. You know, all over the world, the military used to have the best hospital. So they should have a military hospital in the soil of Asaba.
Okay.
Where we can be able to benefit. And
all right, having listened to that video, I want to also let us know that it is not only Asaba people that pass through such. Other section of Igbo land pass through such genocide. They call it genocide in quote, because people suffered in the southeast a lot. Imagine where food supplies were being cut off. Food supplies. That is total starvation. If not the kind of spirit that Igbo man has, I don't think it will be like this now. And if what happens to Igbos happens to any other tribe in Nigeria, I wonder what will happen. Well, the Igbo man has that strong spirit, has been detected by the foreigners that visited Africans during the time of colonialism. And having said that, now let's look into how this man, Graham, described an Igbo man in those days, even up to now. Let's listen to him and listen very well. You understand the makeup of an Igbo man. That nothing, absolutely nothing can spoil the spirit of an Igbo man. He has been made like that. His DNA is like that. So anything that the enemies are trying to do against the Igbo people, maybe they will succeed for some time, but at last the strong will take charge and be where he's supposed to be. Then let's listen to this voice crying from the wilderness, and then we'll come back and continue.
There comes a time when truth must rise from the ashes of silence. A time when the voice of the past breaks through the walls of history and shouts into the present. That time is now. That voice is the voice of the Igbo people, a people so powerful in spirit, so unbreakable in will, that even the mighty British Empire trembled at the sound of their name. They didn't fear the Igbo because they were violent. No. They feared the power of their mind, the strength of their unity, and the depth of their culture. The British Empire, with all its guns and global power, was shaken by a tribe that refused to bow, refused to break, refused to be erased. You see, the Igbo were never just another group of people to be colonized. They were a force of resistance, a pillar of self-rule, a threat to imperial lies. The Igbo believed in freedom long before the West defined it. They believed in justice before the colonizer could spell it. They governed themselves with systems so sophisticated that even European scholars were stunned. They didn't need kings appointed by foreigners. They chose their own leaders. They didn't need foreign religion to find God. They walked with him in spirit and in truth. That is what frightened the empire. Not their weapons, but their wisdom. Not their violence, but their vision. So the British tried to rewrite their story. They tried to brand them rebels, savages, pagans, because they feared their truth. But you cannot bury a people whose roots go deeper than any empire's foundation. You cannot silence a voice that carries the thunder of ancestors and the fire of future generations. The Igbo stood tall when others knelt. They fought back when others surrendered. They dared to say no to injustice, even when the price was blood. That is why they were sold in chains across the Atlantic, because colonizers feared what would happen if the world saw their strength. That is why the world has been silent about their legacy, because their existence exposes the lies of colonial narratives. But the truth is rising now. The descendants of the Igbo are rising. The world will know that the empire feared the Igbo, because the Igbo were never meant to be ruled. They were meant to lead. So if you are of Igbo blood or African descent, or if your spirit yearns for justice, stand tall, walk proud. The legacy they tried to silence is roaring louder than ever. You are not the forgotten, you are the foundation. You are not a shadow of history, you are the light that history tried to hide. And when you walk with that knowledge, with that power in your chest, no empire, past or present, can ever make you feel small again. The British Empire feared the Igbo not for their weapons, but for their wisdom, self-governance, and unbreakable spirit. In a world where empires thrived on control, domination, and submission, the Igbo people represented everything that colonial powers could not predict, could not contain, and could not conquer. They were a people whose strength came not from brute force, but from an inner fire, the kind that refuses to be extinguished. The British were not intimidated by armies or battalions when they encountered the Igbo. They were shaken by a culture that had crafted a society where freedom, equity, and intelligence ruled before the colonizers even arrived. The Igbo did not depend on foreign systems to dictate their way of life. Their communities were built on sophisticated forms of decentralized government where every voice mattered, the elders were respected, the youth were empowered, and leadership was earned, not bought, not inherited, and certainly not forced by any outside throne. This model of society undermined the very foundation of colonialism, which was built on the lie that Africa needed saving, structuring, and civilizing. But here stood the Igbo, already organized, already advanced, already powerful.
Their knowledge of the land, of trade, of spirituality, and of communal governance made them a threat to the imperial narrative. Colonizers feared what would happen if other African tribes followed the Igbo example. What if the continent realized it didn't need to be ruled? What if the people realized they already had power, structure, and the divine right to lead themselves? The British Empire understood that the real danger wasn't in the Igbo lifting a sword, but in them lifting their heads high, refusing to bow, and declaring, "We are not yours to conquer." To break the Igbo, the colonizers knew they had to destroy not just bodies, but identity. They attacked their names, their languages, their faith, and their institutions. They labeled them as troublemakers and resistors, not because they were wrong, but because they were right in all the...
Well, the truth is that people has to be careful on the things they do on this earth. There will be a time when the great grandchildren will come up and be saying that, is this thing really happened in this life? When they hear about this slave trade, when they hear about certain things human beings do, they'll start to imagine, does this thing really happen? You see? So we need to be very careful about the things we are doing. From even now, we need to be very careful, because tomorrow these things will come up as discussion and it will be recorded. Some of the things we are doing now, we are writing our history gradually we are writing our history. When the time comes, people after us will study these things that we have done on this life. So we need to be very careful about the things we engage in and the things we do. Just like the Igbo Landing in Georgia, Atlanta, in America, doing that slave trade, that is a brave act. Instead of them to be taken as slave, they drown in the river. They enter the river wholeheartedly with joy. That is the spirit. And the white men saw this thing, they were marveled. That place was recorded until today, it is still existing. What these people have done. So we have to be very careful about the things we do, probably in the name of making money or other things. Yes, the situation might warrant people to survive, but in that situation of survival, be careful of the things you do, because you don't know the extent it will go in life. Just like what happened in some other part of Delta State, Igbo part of Delta State. They had to change their identity so that they can survive. But look at the effect now. Look at what is happening now. Look at the trouble that is bringing. You see, that is what I'm saying. So, having said that, let me give you some little part of this Igbo Landing story so that you will hear from the horse's mouth, people that are more grounded in that part. When we are done with that clip, then we'll come back and continue.
75 Igbo slaves who drowned themselves at Dunbar Creek in the U.S. state of Georgia in May 1803, rather than succumb to the indignities of slavery. It was seen as the ultimate act of rebellion against their captors, and the campaign organized by Ifeanyi Mbanefo and Dr. Rosemary Nwangu, is aimed at preserving their memory. The project has been introduced to key Igbo leaders in politics, business and academia, as well as other eminent Nigerians. One of the eager subscribers to the idea is said to be the Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka.
Of Igbo men and women chained in the belly of that vessel had already endured the unimaginable, torn from their homeland, forced across the Middle Passage, and sold into a world that promised nothing but cruelty. Yet, when faced with bondage in a foreign land, they made a choice so defiant, so haunting, that it transformed them into legend. Led by their own voices, the captives rose against their oppressors. They overpowered the crew, and as the waters of Dunbar Creek lapped against the Georgia shore, the Igbo captives refused the life that awaited them. Instead, they marched into the water, singing as they walked. The water spirit brought us home, descendants say today. To some, it was a mass suicide. To others, it was a spiritual return, a refusal to let slavery claim their bodies or their souls. The event became known as the Igbo Landing, a story whispered in communities, passed through spirituals, and reshaped into folklore of the flying Africans who rose above their chains and returned to Africa through the sky. But what truly happened that day? Why has history tried to silence their voices? And why does the Igbo Landing remain one of the most powerful acts of resistance in the dark history of slavery?
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the co-creator of the Igbo Landing project, Dr. Rosemary Nwangu. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. You've clearly been inspired by these Igbo slaves and the backstory behind their decision to drown themselves in the sea off the coast of America more than 200 years ago. Tell us how you came across this story.
Well, as we interacted, thank you very much, Charles, for having me. As we've interacted with the intriguing history of Igbo slavery, of the slavery of the black man, the slave trade, and what it did with the cross-civilization and movement of people from Africa to the West and all of that.
Well, that is about the slave trade, about the Igbo man involvement in the slave trade and what happened during that period. But having said that, there is this, marginalization that can never be eroded, that is ongoing. Like I said when I was starting this video, 80% of containers that came into Lagos ended up in Onitsha. And yet, these people have to carry that containers on the road from Lagos to the southeast to deliver them. That is such a long journey. Even though Bonny Port is still functional, Goodluck Jonathan Ebele constructed the Onitsha River Port, or reconstructed it, and it never became functional. Forget what they are claiming. What I see sometimes is trailer carrying containers from Lagos or from Bonny, from Port Harcourt, coming to drop it there. But however, let's also listen to this. It's always good to balance things. The Civil War has come and gone ever since, but some people are still carrying that, at the back of their mind, seriously. Let us not forget that if you are holding somebody on the ground, on the floor, you are still holding yourself. You too, you will not go anywhere. You are holding, so you pin somebody on the floor, on the ground. Where do you think you are going? You cannot go anywhere. But if you lift somebody, you are lifting yourself at the same point. That is the way we say it in Igbo. So by now, we are supposed to have forget all these things and forge ahead. You know that the Igbo man understands the economy more than every other person. It's everywhere. People know about that. That is not a news. So it doesn't mean that we don't care about the betterment of our people. What is going on? by the time we realize the potentials of an Igbo man and allow them to run these things, that is when Nigeria will wake up, and that is when Nigeria will become truly the giant of Africa. Everybody knows about these things, though. The white people know about these things. In fact, they are the ones saying these things. They are the ones bringing some of these things to our knowledge, even though we know. We are feeling it, we know everything. But they also know about it. Listen to this man. You will gain one or two things that is happening.
Igbos in Nigeria, 73% said sometimes or always they were treated unfairly by the government. This is last year. This is the highest rate of any ethnic group surveyed in Africa. In their view, they are sometimes or always treated unfairly by the government.
So it's the issue of injustice?
It is a deep grievance, and it's a disconnect from the Nigeria project, as was mentioned earlier. And I mentioned that number just to underscore the underlying grievance that has to be addressed. So amnesty is potentially part of a package, but the disconnect has to be addressed, and the Southeast is a core pillar of the Nigeria project. It comes back to the discussion of its importance. So all of these issues that are being discussed are inherently political. They're being seen through a political lens. For example, infrastructure, development. The grievance is you have a very productive region that is exporting not just to Nigeria, but internationally. You have, I think, Imo and Anambra are number 4 and number 6 for GDP in Nigeria. And that was in 2021, which was a very violent year. So even amidst the violence, three of the 5 states in Southeast are in the top 12 for GDP per capita. Yet there's no seaport. The bridges are not good. The roads are not good. So it is a development and infrastructure issue, but it's seen through a political lens as a political grievance. The same with security, which is you have significant deployment of security forces, yet the perception is the DPOs are not from Southeast. Many of the officers are not from Southeast. They are not necessarily well-versed in the local context, and so they're not performing the role of community security in a way that they or other communities would expect. So that's a security issue, yes, but it's also perceived through a political lens, and it's the same with federal appointments and involvement in governance. So these are development, these are policy, these are economic issues, but they're seen through a broader political lens that they're not being kind of fairly adjudicated. And I think that's really important to underscore. So amnesty as part of a package may be a solution, but the underlying grievances have to be addressed with an understanding of the political perception, how the infrastructure problems, how the economic problems, how the security issues are perceived politically, and what it means to have a more representative involvement in those efforts from a Southeast perspective. Yes, it has to be a multi-stakeholder approach. The sensitive issues have to be addressed, and there needs to be involvement of the key stakeholders as this initiative is doing. That being said, in contexts like this, you might not move everybody over. You might not convince everybody. But where you make a serious effort and where you provide legitimate avenues, you will see a significant reduction in popular grievance that draws down support for extremism and makes it very difficult to operate. So a multi-stakeholder approach doesn't immediately solve all the problems, but it changes the trajectory, and it moves a lot of the public into using or trying to use the legitimate mechanisms again, as opposed to staying on the sidelines or even supporting extremist activity. So it's where you need to start, and it's the direction that you need to go.
Well, you have heard it. I am not the one saying it. Many people are aware of what is happening. So, but you must work out your salvation. That's why I keep saying this, and I keep crying that I don't expect our politicians to be playing the kind of politics that they are playing, they should be above board. Because the way we are sitting, the way we are being addressed in this country is quite different from the way others are. So we need to sit back and make our regions to be very attractive, just like what is happening in Spain. The Catalonians, they make their region to be very attractive, and that is what is saving them. What happens to our strength? What happens to our powers? We can still exhibit them through what we are doing. Well, with these words, I want to call it a day until I come your way next time. Bye for now.